Manly Hall official, is glad to produce, publish and offer an appeal for better Masons. In the world in which we live today, there is a great need which few seem to be willing to study, that they may supply the necessary thing. There is nothing more important to the growth of man than the realization of individual responsibility. The average person does not shoulder the duties of his life as he should. He does not live up to the best that he knows. He is not true to the things which he claims to believe, but with selfishness and perversion he desecrates the ideals which he should express in his service and labor. This is equally true among those whom we call society, and that other group who claim to have found a great light, or at least to be why. Because he has failed to take a personal interest or realize an individual responsibility. If the Mason only realized that the spirit of the ancient craft can only live in its craftsmen, and that the divine light of Masonry must shine out through the lives of Masons, he would then become worthy of his craft in seeking to glorify Masonry by his own example. For many years Masonic candidates have been recruited from various walks of life, and various motives have led the seeker to the temple door, yet only about 1 in 1,000 is really seeking either spiritual light or philosophical growth. Business is the usual motive which prompts Masonic searchers for it. The average Mason is affiliation, a desire for social prestige, and thoughtless. He is not a criminal, nor is he false intentionally to the concepts which he holds, but he is preoccupied, and he feels no responsibility, no individual obligation, in connection with the study of Masonry. When it comes right down to the truth, the average 32nd degree Mason knows little or nothing of even the first principles of Masonry, because he has not assumed the responsibility and the individual duties which make him one with the spirit of Masonry. When those wondrous rituals are unfolded before him, he is thoughtless. When the lectures are delivered to him, he is thoughtless. As he dons the apron, as he transacts the business of his lodge, he is thoughtless, so he passes on year after year in close touch with the most beautiful and lofty of human sentiments, yet absolutely blind to both their purpose and meaning. The privilege of romping around at Shriners' frolics also gathers quite a percentage of individuals who believe that little red fezzes will be becoming. Still another group joins that they may have an honorable excuse for being away from home 1 night a week. Some are Masons because their fathers were Masons, others because their fathers were not. This is not malicious, nor is it wicked, but it is decidedly unfortunate, for it has absolutely murdered the spirit of Masonry. The ancient mysteries, those glorious temple rites of a people who knew their gods, have been handed down to modern, everyday affairs. In the ancient days, the high priest, that living link between God and man through whose being shone the light of the infinite, and who was in truth the incarnation of the rising sun, sat in the eternal East in a glorious chair of light with the wisdom of a God, the compassion of a Savior, and the power of a Hercules. Not being a Mason myself, and having taken the separate look at the problem on hand, the answer that seems to present itself is this. There is no finer body of men in the world than the members of the ancient and accepted craft, but 99 out of 100 of them, while excellent fellows, have not even a dream consciousness of either Masonry or its ideals. If you're enjoying this video and finding value in the content, we kindly ask you to take a moment to subscribe to the channel. A large portion of our listeners and viewers haven't subscribed yet, and by doing so, you'll help us grow and continue bringing you more high-quality audiobooks. Your support means a lot to us, and it's just one click away. So, go ahead and hit that subscribe button to stay connected and never miss out on our latest releases. There's only one remedy to this problem, for Masonry is probably the most beautiful and most glorious religious philosophy that the world has ever known. In it there is material for thousands of years of study and consideration. Its sublime allegories and wondrous symbols have behind them truths which are the answers to the world's problems. A few Masons realize this. That grand old man of Masonry, Albert Pike, saw what few Masons have ever found. Dr. J. D. Buck, a sainted Masonic soul, found and taught the mystic rites. Frank C. Higgins, with his knowledge of mathematics, geometry, and Kabbalism, is an honor to the craft. They have found the truth of Masonry, and they are living according to their knowledge of its ideals. But where are all the others? Just 1 or 2 out of a million. Where are all the others? They are asleep. They have not lived the Masonic life. They have not dedicated their souls to the answer of the eternal Masonic problem. They have not gone forth in humility and simplicity to search for that which was lost. And the result is that a glorious truth is neglected, a wonderful work has been cast aside, and Masonry, which depends upon Masons for expression, is retreating again to the silent caves where for ages the illuminated few have guarded the destinies of the ignorant many. Masons, wake up before it is too late. Your creed and your era demand the best that is in you. They demand the sanctifying of a life, the regeneration of a body, the purification of a soul, and the ordination of a spirit. You have a glorious opportunity. Wake and grasp it ere it passes on to other peoples. Realize that your great privilege is to illuminate the world, not alone the work in your tiled lodge, but in your home, your business, and your association with your fellow men is the basis of your Masonic power. Masonry can only be what Masons are, but its spirit is the wisdom of God. Your temple is a holy place, a sacred place, not to be defamed by material thoughts and dissensions. Drive the moneylenders from your steps, the materialists from your shrines, the schemers from your ranks, or else so live that these shall be regenerated and transmuted while among you. Show your light to the world, and as true builders of the Father's house labor for the good of humanity. Forget your robes, your tinsels, and your jewelry, and make of your living body and soul ornaments of your lodge. Let not the tinsel drape an empty void, but cover the hearts of noble men. Spiritual hobos. A romance in psychologies it is, alas, too true that few individuals care to be reminded of the hollows, furrows, ravines and gullies in their mental, physical, and spiritual makeups. Compliments are always in demand, and a suave disposition never fails to draw around it bevies of friends and admirers who will bask in the honeyed sentiments like flies in a sugar bowl. People love to foster the fond idea that somebody else believes them to be something which they honestly know they are not. Most of our occult students will many times declare themselves to be braced in all the weak spots, strong and courageous, ready to listen to the truth, whole truth, and everything but the truth. But rarely do they demonstrate any great amount of joy when reality does strike against them or seek admittance into their consciousness. Most students tell us that they want to know their weak points, where their spiritual bunions are located, and what constitutes the leading detractions of their temperaments. But if we happen to intimate even for a second that they are suffering from any slight imperfection, they immediately leave us thoroughly convinced that we lack polish, grace, and refinement, and are most hopelessly deficient in spiritual sentiments. While if we gush prettily over them, address them as old students, advanced souls, ad infinitum, they are then in a condition where most any living creature can separate them from their rent money, salary, and more than likely their family. In other and shorter words, they like to be patted on the back, are willing slaves to anyone who will weave fanciful dramas around them for their own glorification, even though they really know that they possess none of the attributes in question. But if for a moment we infer that the average Sikh hereafter the occult is a hobo, a bum, a tramp, a nonentity, a vagabond, vandal and vampire, for some absolutely unknown reason he passes us on the street next day without recognition, though he may realize that he is all of the things described, plus more known only to himself. But let us, just for the sake of the principle involved, be truthful for once and spite the devil, admitting that at the present time the majority of seekers after things spiritual are not only looking in the wrong direction for the truth, but positively ignore it when they do see it. They continue gliding through life talking themselves into believing that they are personifications of the eternal seeker, when in reality they are nothing but omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, never omniactive incarnations of specific worthlessness. These may not seem pleasant thoughts. In fact, we may be called cruel, cold, and unjust, but with the pure eye of logic, the brain of reason, and the steady hand of the surgeon, let us anatomize what we discover when we start carving modern super-spiritual cadaver and see how it sums up, as we cast the searchlight of common sense upon the problems of modern religion and examine the fruits of philosophical endeavor, listening with rapt attention to the weird discourses which pour forth as bubbling brooks and dashing cataracts of modern Platonic reasoning. A great pessimism grips our soul, and the icy fingers of doubt strangle out our tiny germ of hope as we seek to synthesize such hopelessly impossible brainstorms. So at last we are forced to the conclusion that most of our so-called thinkers are neither spiritual, philosophical, intelligent, nor studious, but are merely brain convolution contortionists twisting their dua mater and pia mater into bonots and figure eights, and then ye gods, inviting others to join them in their mental gymnastics. In other words, instead of being statisticians, economic reformers, teachers and logicians, they are merely straining the cerebral vesicles and painfully spraining the mind. When we realize this, we are confronted with a great problem: what is thought? And how should its wonderful power be used to express a maximum of intelligent result? The answer to the problem is, man must learn to think in harmony with nature and natural law. When he seeks to battle against his own intellectuality, to deny the existence of things which he daily and hourly contacts, or seeks with sheer force of will to change the direction of the universe or reverse the poles, he is merely wasting power and energy on an absolutely hopeless, helpless, and non-productive series of concepts which would be comic if they were not divinely sad. The average person does not know how to think and never will until he individually evolves the mental faculties and powers to do it with. And the first step towards this is to cease imitating the ideas of others, learn to reason out and master the problems of your own existence, and being responsible to yourself instead of rushing to another fool for help, whereupon each clasps the other and both sink. The average person who believes himself to be philosophical, spiritual, and ethical is merely a rambling intellectual hobo, helpless and harmless, whose every thought and action he has begged, borrowed, or stolen from somebody else. Those who think other people's thoughts, lean on other people's shoulders, and do not labor mentally, physically, and spiritually for the things they want are tramps, imposters, and human fungi, as sure as there are such things in nature. Taking the modern occult student as an example of spiritual unfoldment and moral culture, we usually find him to be merely a religious vagabond wandering from cult to creed, sleeping in intellectual boxcars, under pseudo-theological haystacks, and persistently avoiding the woodpile of labor with a highly evolved efficiency that is positively uncanny. Students of the wisdom teachings little realize how like beggars they can become if they continue to wander from pillar to post, knocking at each farmhouse door, hoping that fortune will present herself, but inwardly praying that the bulldog of adversity will not advance to the rear of their immediate environment. There is a great kingdom of the unemployed, and there is also that aristocratic fraternity known as gentlemen of the great outdoors, and, alas, it is but too true, said institutions do many things not in accordance with the ethical statutes of our beautiful country. But let us not add infamy to insult or further scandalize their already dubious reputations by listing with them our modem spiritual students. For, 'tis sad to relate, these gentlemen of the open road and non-eventuating pilgrims are never half as guilty of mental or physical vagrancy as that band of New Thought and spiritual students are addicted to intellectual grafting and semi-conscientious knavery. None of us will ever forget Tattered Tom or Milord the Baron Rags and other blue-blood members of the slipshod aristocracy, for they are in a class unapproachable and inimicable, the very acme of active indolence. As they promenade along the tar-paved boulevard resembling animated scarecrows or bipedular ash cans, they manifest and express in every movement of their being a nobility greater far than a scion of the House of Navarre. They are sublimely humorous, pathetically ridiculous, and always bring poetically to our minds a picture of injured innocence and overworked ennui. Along they go with smiles on their faces, whistling merry tunes, while clothed in a bundle of dot rags and tatters. Gentlemen of leisure whose motto is, "Don't work when there's anything else to do." Latest psychological axiom. You have all heard them as they gently knock at the back door, after making sure that the Airedale is chained, and with fringed hat in hand deliver a touching elegy with a seriousness and masterful eloquence worthy of a trained tragedian. "Please, lady, I'm a poor man, down and out and too sick to work. I'm trying to get money enough to make the next city where I have a brother in business. I come from a good family, Mom, I'm not a tramp or anything like that. I'm just suffering from pecuniary embarrassment, a slight financial shortage. I wonder if it would be possible for you to give me a piece of pie or some of your husband's old clothes." This is a noble art, the art of begging, a cultured science which has been evolved through generations of practice, the developing of sympathetic voices, sad-looking eyes, and cherubic expressions that shine out with celestial radiance from beneath several days' growth of whiskers. When poor people enter this profession and the down-and-outers promenade along the dusty road of life in someone else's clothes, we call them tramps. But when they rise upward to more ethical circle of philosophical, spiritual, and scientific things, we then call them mystics, psychologists, philosophers, eccentric geniuses, advanced thinkers, and deep students of the occult. If you will just take the average modernist in religion, however, and analyze him carefully, you will find a weird and wondrous composite combination of borrowed plumage. Like Aesop of the ancient fables, in examining said rare specimen, we find an ugly duckling with one glorious peacock plume rising from the rear. Such a sight as would give a naturalist or poultry fancier epileptic convulsions unless he knew for a certainty that the glorious tuft was not an inherent product of the bird. Mentally, physically, never to mention spiritually, not one thing our occult student wears fits him. Surely he represents the ex-president of the ancient and honorable order of whatnots. His hat is too big and nestles grotesquely over ears that pivot and tum outward by the weight. Of course it is no longer a dilapidated derby or gently atrophying tall silk, but just a philosophical concept and shortcut to heaven he has begged off the Jones family down the street. His borrowed alchemy hangs loosely from his shoulders, gathered in by the safety pin of someone else's ethics. His pant legs of affirmation and denial were made for a man 3 times his size, consequently fit him too much, but still he is wearing them, and what makes it infinitely worse is they are not mates, for he sneaked them out of Smith's backyard while Mrs. Smith was paying the iceman. His shoes, one a patent leather the other a goulash, leave strange footprints on the sands behind, which footprints are the measure of his soul. For they are not his own either, have been begged, borrowed or stolen from some oracle along the meandering line of his pilgrimage. Thus he stands before you. Nothing more, nothing less than an intellectual vagabond and spiritual lounge lizard. Or shall we say chameleon? For as this little lizard changes his color to suit his background, so the mystic changes his creeds to suit his needs. Like the ordinary tramp, he hates work worse than poison, hates water like a cat, but is hoping against hope that he will get to heaven somehow if he can borrow enough old clothes to make it, or can hop an empty freight going in that direction. In other words, our nondescript student of religion is eternally searching for something easy that he can secure without labor, and lives ardently hopeful of finding a way to enjoy the harvest that his industrious brother creatures have stored up. Students do not mean to do this, but it seems an innate faculty of the human mind to seek to avoid exertion. The lower in man cries out for rest, while the higher spiritual powers seek to express more incessant activity. There are hobos on the physical plane of nature who claim to have been tired for 50 years and to be suffering from strange ailments which obstruct the vital energies, when the real cause of their ailment is chronic laziness. The same may be said of our spiritual seekers, for most of them are wasting away with some mystic lassitude which is nothing more nor less than a pure lack of a desire to do anything. Sciences which seek to promote mental exertion and individual advancement become less and less popular all the time, while intellectual and spiritual soothing syrups and teething rings are in ever more constant demand. Spiritual narcotics which will prevent human beings from feeling the pains of daily life are called blessings, but in reality are the greatest curses of the human race. If students could only realize that when they search for others who will answer for them the problems of their own lives with formulas and recipes which eliminate individual expression, making it possible to glide en masse to the eternal footstool, or who will rent them pseudo-evolutionary roller skates to shorten the path, they are only being hoodwinked and deceived. And always by those who have themselves fallen slaves to their own or their brothers' absurdities. There is no way of reaching the true position the human race is ordained to fill without individually standing upon our own feet and learning mentally, physically and spiritually to earn legitimately and honestly whatsoever quality we are seeking mastery over. there must be an equal effort expended and an honest foundation laid for everything which we want, or else man is, in the sight of nature, a thief and a robber. Those people who fondly believe that their duty ceases with the getting of things, or that they can make slick transactions in religion or some rather clever intellectual deals to their own profit, have a great awakening before them, an awakening filled with sorrow and unhappiness, because they have failed to realize that the universe is governed by just, non-commercialized non-favoritism, which is a great abstract intelligence, governs impartially all of its creations, rewarding each according to its works. There is no greater crime in the world than to promise or to intimate that we can make another spiritual, intelligent, or prosperous, for it is absolutely impossible to do so. And those who charge exorbitant prices for shortcuts to heaven are charging for something which they do not possess, and are assessing work that only the ego of an individual alone is capable of carrying on. In other words, Mr. Jones is paying Mr. Smith for the privilege of saving his own soul. Persons who graft in such a way as this should be treated in the same manner that the government treats oil sharks who sell shares in non-entitled wells and the like. They are mental, physical, and spiritual criminals, and those who patronize them are merely demonstrating a superabundance of vacuum in the cranial cavity. But the demand will always produce the supply, and as long as there are people to be fooled, there will always be those pleased to do it for them. It is perfectly legitimate to instruct man in the ways he should go, providing that the party of the first part knows what way anything should go, but to promise results is beyond the privilege of God Himself. Instead of giving a spiritual tramp a meal in every case, he should be ushered into the backyard where stands the menacing woodpile and told that if he will chop 2 cords his lunch is ready. At such a moment as this the physical hobo disintegrates while his spiritual correlate dissolves into a dank cloud of iridescent dew-nose, cracked, insulted, and with every quill in his temperament standing on end. We may not believe it this way, but when work is mentioned, the seekers after eternal wisdom rise, one after another, and magically vanish effervescing streams of many-colored indignation, this at the bare suggestion of earning their daily bread. If he is suffering from a gouty toe or a gastronomic reaction, and you tell him to watch his diet and stop eating roast goose or breaded veal cutlets, he will immediately rise, a towering pillar of righteous wrath, and tell you that you are neither spiritual, ethical, nor philosophical. Said student will then head for some temple of solace where he will wade through a long concentration, take an aphrematic pill or 10 grains of sugar-coated sentiment, and then go out to eat fried bricks and 10-penny nails a la carte until the closing of the last act, when the nail he could not digest is used to hold down his coffin lid. If you hint to the student of ancient wisdom that bathing is an inducement to health, you are ordinary, materialistic, and lack Oriental ideality. But there is not one occultist in a million who has studied the plumbing system of Pompeii while engaged in his ancient researches. If you tell him he has a mean disposition, you are a lowbrow, a mishap, an inferior, and several other things he cannot remember, but which nevertheless apply to the problem on hand. However, if you will prove to him conclusively and beyond all shadow of doubt that his spavin can be cured by some supernatural agency which requires no temperance or moderation in his own life, then indeed you are gifted of the gods. He will then peel forth the last shekel and think nothing of working at $1 a day for 15 years to pay you for a Latin formula or a Sanskrit delineation punctuated in Hebrew, when for a 5-cent bar of ivory soap he could be a healthy man for 75 years, that is, of course, if he adds to the soap the necessary exertion for applying. There are also people, strange creatures of demented reasoning, who will condescend to study the occult if you will guarantee them illumination, unity with the Absolute, mastery and initiation, not to mention such trivial things as the seventh sense and the ability to rove on other planets or pick daisies on the Milky Way at the completion of a 2-week course. If you have a dashing personality, they may even wait for weeks for their spiritual insight, especially if the language you clothe the supernatural sciences in is sufficiently set with the rubies of eloquence, and like the sages of old you are an orator with a silver tongue. But when you advise said persons that mastery requires from 1 to 350 million years of hard work, low pay, and tough luck, he immediately tells you that you lack inspiration, that you know nothing of heaven and its mysteries, that your aura radiates /boneset tea, and that by good right you should be burned in effigy on the public square. If you warn him that his eternal salvation depends upon his own works, he is discouraged, disconcerted and perplexed, for he knows he has never done anything worthy and can never get far on individual merit. But just whisper mysteriously in his ear a state secret all about a new way of leaning on the Lord whereby you may slip, and for nothing he is thenceforth a subject of exuberant reaction. For our average student has no intention whatsoever of giving up anything he likes, will always do the thing he wants to, even if it is being miserable, and some are never happy unless they are completely miserable. To enjoy hard work at this day and age is to invite investigation from the psychopathic ward, and if such a case could be found, a symposium of international scientists would come into session to diagnose the extraordinary phenomenon. A person who glories in labor and in contact with the hard knocks of the world are about as rare as a total eclipse of Gloom Bridge or Uncle C's three-headed calf, and are to be listed with the scientific marvels of the age, especially if found among spiritual students. So they go, praying for the day when someone will build an environment for them wherein they may be ideally happy, or that a great master will come to clean up the world, a work we ought to be doing every day, or that a great light will descend from the heavens when we ought to be out lighting our own way. They are longing for someone else to heal them of something they have no business to have. And while they have a mean disposition and a cussedly bad temper, they long to find a way to conceal it by plastering it deep down under a thick layer of beauty mud, which comes under the heading of convincing personality cosmetics. So Tattered Tom and Frenzied Freddy, address unknown, vocation unthinkable, wander from door to door asking for pie, overalls and old shoes, and like the foolish virgins of old begging of the wise ones oil for their lamps, instead of standing up like the men and women they claim to be, kicking out their mean dispositions, cleaning out their self-infected body and taking a good long stretch. Perhaps someday they may learn to look somebody straight in the eye and say, "There is nothing in the world equal to a life filled with works, worries, trials and troubles, for it has given me the experience and strength to rise above misfortune, stand on my own feet, and proclaim my inherent right to be one of the elect." The price of knowledge and spirituality is the proper use of the powers which man has in 75 squadrons of angels, 300 battalions of gods, 57 varieties of divas, 287 regiments of psychological infantry, and 15 or 20 spiritual big guns are not enough to stand forth and say boo to the powers of nature, much less claim the responsibility of easing an individual into heaven. 65 million chariots drawn by cherubim will never be able to get our big toe over if we continue to tramp around in the name of religion, vampirizing and vandalizing everyone with whom we come in contact. Each is foreordained and predestined from before the time the universe was formed to figure his way out of and work his way out of the undesirable qualities of nature. When he sits back asleep at the switch or trusts someone else to carry him, all is lost. Never with such concepts as these will the spirit of man find rest in the lands beyond the river Styx. He would surely drown in said river if someone didn't swim in after him. But it seems that each leans on everything else perfectly content to let someone who can think for them, and someone who can work for them. Instead of building the faculties, powers and qualities within themselves which entitle them to stand upon their own feet with well-fitting garments of their own making earned by the sweat of their brows, they now stand as divine incarnations of the cosmic spirit celestial hobo tagged out in a little bit of everything belonging to everybody else. If by any chance the people who loaned them their robes should ask them back, the average mystic will stand shivering at the gates of the great unknown as one by one his pet concepts fly home until nothing remains but a dismal failure personifying the true inherent qualities which the student himself has evolved by his own lack of active labor. The Ave Maria. This is the story of a spark buried deep in the heart of a dying flame, one of those tragic little legends which bring close to our soul the realization of nature's subtle working. Few realize that the shell of clay shrouds a deathless spark, and yet if the world thought they would know that this is the truth. Something hidden far within, unseen and unknown, cries eternally to be admitted and realized by its prison walls. Man must not judge his brother creature by the form alone, for behind rough exteriors of this world there is ofttimes hidden a finer, sweeter and more beautiful spirit than we would ever dream could exist there. Of 10 from the shadow of a broken, discordant body there shines forth a gleam of celestial radiance. There's a strange pathos under the thoughtlessness of the world. All have felt an inner urge, a great desire to realize some hidden ideal, and man of 10 soars heavenward upon the pinions of inspiration only to have the ever-human crush the vision with the stony fingers of crystallization. And how often the spirit in the world of forms chafes to be free from the living corpse that holds it to the sordid things. Nature is like a string of wondrous beads, all are connected by a single thread of living gold, and a tiny spark of divine life shines out between all the beads that have an end. It is hard to realize that the tools will grow dull with age, and as time slowly crushes the instrument, we wonder why the glorious dreams that fill our soul are no longer shaped to realities. We try ever to be young. Even when the unseen reaper gathers us to the great unknown, still the divine spirit of youth within looks forward with eagerness to creation's endless adventure. It is in a little town in the old country, with its cobblestone streets, its simple folk and honest simplicity, that our story is laid. In the center of the town stood the great cathedral with tiny buildings gathered under the protection of its massive form. Its grand Gothic arches rise to shadows of an endless night which hangs forever amid its lofty rafters and mysterious hallways, only but dimly lighted by the sunbeams which struggle in through the panes of many-colored glass. A dull hush filled the building, and its cold, lifeless air reminded one of the vaults of emperors and the mausoleums of kings, where endless rows of marble tombs stand like phantoms in the dim uncertain light. At one end of the massive building where the altar place stood, guarded by tiny gleaming candles which sent flickering shadows on the dark stained walls. The mighty organ rises, a weird mystery of tubes and pipes, a mighty sentinel guarding the holy place of God. It is an ancient church, and for many ages worshippers have knelt upon its marble floor, deep rutted by the footsteps of the pious. Suddenly the silence was broken by footfalls which sounded hollowly in the great blank silence of the place of worship. A little figure walked slowly down through the gloomy arches to the foot of the ancient altar. It was an old man, his back bent with age, and his long white hair hanging in ringlets over his shoulders. Reaching the foot of the altar steps, he stopped and gazed lovingly up to the monster organ half concealed in the gloom of the nave. A thin streamlet of tears coursed down the old man's cheeks, and a sob echoed through the ancient hallways. And then slowly the glorious spiritual face turned away from the organ, and with his arms hanging at his sides the old man walked away. Day after day he came there just for a few moments, and then crept away again to his little home on the outskirts of the town. Sometimes there were others in the mighty cathedral, kneeling in prayer upon the worn flagstones. Their eyes grew misty also as they watched the old man, for they knew the sacred tragedy of his life. The white-haired figure was the organist who since the days of his youth had lent the voice of angels to the pipes of wood. Everyone knew the sad story of his life, for in that little town there were no secrets, and all lived like one great family with compassion and tenderness each to the other. The good housewives sighed when they told the story of how one day, as he was playing his beloved Ave Maria, the old man's fingers had fallen from the keys paralyzed, and the mighty organ was silent in the midst of its melody. They knew that he had played his organ for the last time, for his dead fingers could never again move lightly across the keys. The little story was the tragedy of the village, and all hearts went out to him as day after day the lonely old man entered the ancient cathedral and gazed up at the lofty instrument which had been his friend for 70 years and 10. Although his fingers were stilled forever, the soul of the musician was still alive. For years the mighty man-made thing with its harmony celestial had been the comrade and companion of a lonely life, and up in the little balcony where the keyboard stood the organist had left his heart. In the days of sorrow when all others had deserted him, through the nights of anguish which always fill the heart of a dreamer, he had climbed the little stairway, and the people outside had heard wondrous symphonies swell forth, melodies born of sadness and the shattered soul of one the world could never understand. Through pain and pleasure, through youth and manhood, and even as the snow of age gathered upon his brow, the old musician had played, loved by all and loving all, but understood by none save the old organ in the great cathedral. New fingers now played its ancient keys, another master gave it life, but still the heart of the old musician dreamed of his beloved instrument and prayed that once more he might touch its aged keys before eternity shrouded him with the endless past. So each day he came and humbly offered his little prayer that once more his dead fingers might play the living harmonies which filled his soul. The spirit of man never grows old, but through the ripening years of experience just learns to feel more, to be greater and closer to the divine. The life within does not age till the frame is bent. The same glorious harmonies filled the musician's soul, but the fingers of clay no longer heeded the genius of the master's mind. But still with simple faith he prayed for the joy of one last communion, and the feeling of its possibility comforted his aching heart. So the years passed, the step of the musician grew tottering and broken, The very stones were worn by his footsteps, and the angel of death hovered near him as the chill of eternal winter crept ever closer to his heart. But still he came each day to gaze upon the thing he loved, to pray, to hope, and to remember. It was late one afternoon, and the setting sun was sending its last rays through the towering windows adorned with their many-colored pictures of the Master's life. The old organist had entered the church and was standing as he had so often in the past at the base of the mighty organ, gazing up at the gloomy shadows which partly concealed the rows of ancient tubes. In a hushed voice he spoke as to a living thing, "Oh, friend of my youth! Oh, comforter of my old age! Inspiration in the moments of glory! Silent comrade in times of sorrow! My pilgrimage is nearing its end. Will I ever play again upon your ivory keys the melodies that fill my soul, but which these poor hands can bring forth no more? Still great ideals thrill through me, and the music as of angels' voices sounds ever in my ears. Ofttimes in the shades of night I hear strange songs and melodies, and had I now the fingers the world would know many wondrous things. But, alas, it is all over, all but a dream of the deathless past. You were my life, my all, and somewhere among your ancient tubes and pipes my heart will always be, for I love you now as in the days of old. Oh, why must the soul of man remain in darkness when the clay is broken? My time here is not long, for in the shadows of the night I hear voices from a mystic land unseen. The world of spirit surrounds me, and I understand it better as the world of men grows fainter every day. Only one thing I ask before I go: once more I would play your ivory keys. Once more to give life to your soulless being." Obeying an impulse which he could not understand, the old organist slowly climbed the narrow stairs which led to the keyboard of the organ, and sitting down upon the ancient stool gazed lovingly at the form so darkened by age. The setting sun sent one lonely beam through the tinted panes, lighting the face of the aged man with its halo of silver locks in a glory divine. The great inspiration filled the musician's soul. The youth so far behind flooded back again as wondrous rhythms swayed his being, and all the glory of the music he loved so well thrilled through him. Instinctively he sought to raise his arms and place his fingers upon the keyboard. Then he realized, alas, that his youth was but a dream, and with a broken sob the old man's head sank upon the organ. The ancient keys were wet with his tears as the last shades of the glorious sun shone dimly through the painted glass. As the good folks of the city sat round their fires, there suddenly broke upon their ears a sound, the voice of the mighty organ in the great cathedral, pouring forth in a welling fountain of symphony and harmony. They stopped to listen. There was but one in all the world who could play such divine chords, and he was paralyzed. Those who dwelt near the cathedral whispered that never before had such thunderous tones, such mellow notes, such divine sound issued from that organ. It seemed alive, and each recognized the melody that sounded forth. In the years gone by they had heard it when the old musician was in his prime. Each knew that it was the one he loved so well, the harmony that had soothed him so many times in sorrow and inspired him in peace, the Ave Maria. A few came out of their homes and reverently crossed the open square to the portals of the church. The very building seemed to rock, and in awe and trembling they crossed themselves, for a strange presence was in that cathedral, a hush, a mystic power which they could not comprehend. One by one they gathered and knelt upon the rutted floor. Still the harmony poured forth in welling cadences from behind the little curtain which marked the keyboard of the organ. One, a little bolder than the rest, slowly climbed the steps and gazed with reverence into the alcove where the organ stood. Then he raised his hands to his face and with a cry rushed down the stairs and fell in prayer at the foot of the organ. A few moments passed, and then from among those gathered a good man of the town came forth, a sturdy Christian of honest principles, beloved by all the blacksmith of the town. Hat in hand he slowly climbed the little stairs and entered the alcove from which the other had fled. He too gave a gasp and knelt in prayer. On the floor in the gloom lay the body of the organist, his white face turned upward to the half-shade of the descending night in which loomed the organ pipes. His beautiful S2I ritual face was lighted with a divine peace, and his whole being seemed at rest. But this was not the miracle. Copyright 2025 by Manly Hall Official. Thank you for listening. Please consider to subscribe, like, and share to help the channel growth, new videos on a daily basis.